Hey there, and thanks for stopping by to check out my new video. If you're into 30 caliber magnums, shooting them out to a mile, maybe even a little bit further, then stick around because we've got an awesome video in the works here for you. This is one I've been wanting to launch for the past year or so, or really since I got the 300 Norma Magnum barrel, and a topic that I get a ton of messages from many of you on Instagram asking my opinion. So what I plan to do in this video is fire up 300 PRC and 300 Norma on the same range, same day, similar conditions, and bring you along to experience how they perform in a side-by-side comparison. Now, before we start shooting, I plan to go into a quick gear review to talk about what I'm going to shoot in this video. Then we're going to move down to 100 yards where I'll give you a performance baseline on both calibers for accuracy, velocity, standard deviation, extreme spread. Then we'll move out, and I plan to put this full-size IPSC at about 1,500 yards. I love shooting 1,500 yards for some reason. I feel like this is a great target for that 1,500 yard mark. And then we'll push out a little bit further, say a mile or maybe a little bit beyond that with a 30-inch circle. And at the end of the video, we'll come back here and I'll summarize my thoughts around running both calibers side by side and give you which one I would choose. Now from here, what are we going to run for gear in this video? Well, the rifle is going to be my Barrett MRAD that you've seen many times previously on the channel. This is a factory rifle. I haven't changed anything about it. And in fact, we're going to be shooting the Factory Barrett 300 PRC 1-8 twist barrel, as well as the Factory Barrett 300 Norma Magnum 1-8 twist barrel. Now I think that PRC I've got 600 to 700 rounds on, and the Norma I've probably got 300 to 400 rounds on. And that's simply because I've had the PRC much longer than the Norma. I had to wait quite a while to get this Norma barrel, so I don't have the number of rounds on it that I do the PRC. For optics, we're going to be running the Element Theos 6-36 that was sent to me by Utah Air Guns. Really appreciate Utah Air Guns helping out the channel and providing some cool gear for me to shoot and create new content with. I've got a few rounds on this Theos now. I'm impressed with the scope. I plan to do a dedicated review video here in a couple of weeks or a couple of months as I spend more time with it. But I feel like 6-36 is really going to allow me to stretch the legs on this MRAD and make hits at distance with no problem. Now the scope is mounted in this Griffin armament, single piece, 1.45 inch 34 millimeter mount. This mount has 15 MOA of elevation built into it. So when you pair that with the 10 mils on the Barrett rail, I have a lot of elevation built into this package so that I can really maximize the elevation in the scope to take those shots out there at long range. You can also see I've got my Impact 4000 mounted on top of the scope, and I plan to use this for ranging as well as the ballistic solution for each round throughout the video. So after I zero the rifle, I will then zero the Impact 4000, upload the ballistic information that I gather at 100 yards for velocity and G7 BC out of the FX True Ballistic Chronograph, put that in the Impact 4000, and then shoot that solution with both calibers to keep it as apples to apples as I can. Ammunition for the video will be hand loads for both rounds. The 300 PRC, I'm going to be shooting the 230 atip. And the 300 Norma Magnum, I'll be shooting the 250 atip. Now these are loads that I developed previously. Quite frankly, it's been a little while since I shot beyond a mile or out there at that extreme long range, so I might be a little bit rusty as a shooter. And I really haven't had a ton of time on these loads recently. So I feel like they should perform well. I know they're going to shoot fine. The thing I'm not sure about is where that velocity spread is going to fall. But there's one way to find out, and that's to shoot the rounds. Now other gear that I want to mention, the ear protection and eye protection, as well as soft body armor that you'll be seeing on the channel in this video and in future content, is provided by Warbird Pro. Warbird is a new company providing protection gear, and it's really cool because it gives me an opportunity to help you out. So if you're in the market for eyes, ears, or soft body armor, check out Warbird and then make sure to use my discount code, MULLETS, for 10% off of your order. This is the first time I've been able to give back to my viewers. I'm really excited about it, and it's the growth and support from all of you that are providing me these opportunities. So I thank those of you that are returning, and I welcome the new viewers to join my channel and come along for the journey. I've got a ton of new content coming. So from here, let's move down to the 100-yard line, fire up both calibers, see how they perform for accuracy, and then we'll push out on steel finally, we'll wrap up here at the end. First up, let's take a look at how the 300 Norma barrel performed on paper here at 100 yards. It's worth noting that was a clean barrel when I installed it in the rifle. So my first round fired off camera landed here. Second round fired off camera landed here. I was feeling pretty good about that, so I decided to go ahead and load up 5 rounds to shoot a group for you on camera. Those 5 rounds landed right here, just a little bit high on my point of aim. Overall, this group, I'll insert a close-up clip here, is about 0.75 inches or just under 1 MOA. So very acceptable accuracy for what we're going to try to do out here today. I ran those rounds through the FX True Ballistic Chronograph. I got an average speed of 28.76, extreme spread of 30, and an SD of 10. That's a little bit more velocity variation than I'd like to see, but it is what it is, and I still think we'll make plenty of hits out here at distance. The True Ballistic Chronograph calculated a G7 BC of 0.446, so it'll be kind of fun to plug that into my app and see how that performs out at 1,000 yards plus. I also want to note this landed just a little bit high. I did go ahead and adjust that down a tenth to try to correct that zero before we push out on steel at distance. So from here, let's stretch the 300 Norma barrel out and see how it stacks up long range. I ran down and put up my full-size IPSC at what range is using the Impact 4000. 1,450 yards. Now I updated the Impact with what I got there at 100 yards, velocity and BC wise. It's calling for 11.1 mils. And I estimate about a 12-mile-an-hour wind out of the 4 o'clock. And I updated that in the Impact. It's calling for 1.6 mils right. So we will hold that with our first round. 1.6 right. I'm going to come down a tenth. Need to cut that windage hold back just a bit. 1.4. Seems like wind might have died. Call it 1. Bipod's sinking down. All right, we'll go back to 1. All right, just over it. Impact. Just off that right edge. Right edge. Impact. Back. And that's all I got. So, velocity wise, average of 28.76. My spread got a little bit wide on that one at 45 with an SD of 12, so I'd have to go back and review the shots to see what that was about. But ultimately, I believe we had 4 impacts out of 10. 11 mils of elevation seems to be where it's at, and it seems like a windage there between 1 mil and 1.2, maybe 0.8 and 1.2 is where I was making those impacts. So let's push out a little bit further and see if I can connect at 18, a little over 1,800 yards. I've got a handful of 300 Normas left, so let's go ahead and send those out there at 1880. I was making my impacts there at about 2 mils, so let's see if that continues. go just off the left edge. 2.2. Just off the right edge. 2 mils seems to be it. The right edge. That one dropped to the left. Impact 1.6. Impact. Impact. And that's all we got. So that's a fun run. 1.6, seems like the wind might have died off a little bit. We're making our impacts out there at about 17.3 mils. One of my favorite things about the Barrett MRAD is the caliber change capability. So in a matter of minutes, I was able to remove the 300 Norma barrel, install the 300 PRC barrel, and get zeroed. So unfortunately, I don't think I can show all that process on YouTube because it might be disassembly and against the rules, but it's simple. You pull 2 screws that tension the barrel, slide it out, swap your bolt head, and you have a new caliber. Now my process here at 100 yards to get zeroed was as follows. So my 300 PRC, we're still using the same paper that I shot earlier with the 300 Norma. My first round, and this was a clean barrel as well, just like the Norma, I was aiming here and impacted here. I had to come up 0.5 mils and right 1 mil. I then fired these 3 rounds right here as kind of a confirmation group. I felt good about that. And then I came up top and fired these 5 rounds right here. So those 5 rounds, they measure right at 1 inch or probably 1 MOA. As far as velocity, I ran it across the FX True Ballistic Chronograph and I got an average of 28.85, so just a little bit higher than the 300 Norma. My standard deviation was high single digits with a spread just shy of 30. So probably not spectacular velocity consistency, but I think it'll work just fine for what we're trying to do in this video. And the FX True Ballistic Chronograph measured a G7 BC of just over 0.42. So with that, I'm going to update my Impact 4000 and we'll go out and shoot the same steel targets that we did with the Norma. So let's go ahead and stretch out the 300 PRC barrel. Remember, my first target out there is a full-size IPSC at 1,450 yards. But I'm going to go ahead and range that with the Impact 4000 that I've updated with the velocity and G7 BC from 100 yards. And it's calling for 11.3 mils. So that's about 0.3 mils more than the Norma. Wind feels about the same, maybe 12 mile an hour or so from the 4 o'clock. And the impact is calling for 1.8 mils right. So that's where we'll start. Okay, so that landed a couple of tenths low. Let's come up 3 tenths, or that was 2 tenths. Stuff the right edge. Right edge. Pass. 1.6. Pass. right edge. And that's all we got. So a handful of impacts out there. It seems like 1.6 mils. The impact was surprisingly close. Velocity-wise, we're showing an average of 28.75 with a spread of right at 50, SD of 15, and an adjusted BC of 0.419. So ultimately, that kind of velocity spread is going to be really challenging out here at these distances. I'm a little bit disappointed in my hand loads, but it seems like 11.5 mils was the ticket out there, so about a half mil more than the Norma. Let's go ahead and push on out to that 30-inch circle. How about we put some rounds on the 30-inch circle with the 230 atip out of the 300 PRC. Now to keep things apples to apples, I want to go ahead and range with the Impact 4000 as I've updated it with the ballistic information we gathered at 100 yards for velocity and G7 BC. And that's calling for just over 17.9 mils of elevation to get out there. So let's go to 18 mils. Go ahead and dial that on. Wind still seems to be coming about 12 miles an hour out of the 4 o'clock. And the Impact 4000 is calling for 2.2 mils to the right. That's where we'll send our first round. Just a little bit low. Come up 2/10. Tripod down. That way I'm smashed into my bag. Velocity seemed normal on that one. That landed out there at about 2.5. Let's come up another 2/10. Landed low. Windage was good. Call for 3/10. Dropped low. Let me hold top edge of plate. And that went over. Just off the 4 o'clock. Same spot. That velocity was quite slow. Okay. Call on that one. So we are at 18.7 mils to get those couple of impacts, and windage was about 2.4. My velocity spread actually was a little bit better with the 300 PRC. I'm showing an average of 28.70, so a little bit slower than we had at 100 yards, which probably explains the increase in elevation. My spread was 37, which again isn't great for shooting this far. Standard deviation though of 9. So that tells me probably the bulk of those shots were pretty tight with a couple of flyers. So ultimately, we got 2 impacts out there at 18.7, which is quite a bit more elevation required than the 300 PRC or the 300 Norma. So there you have it, a side-by-side comparison of 300 Norma against 300 PRC on the same day, same range, and same conditions. And those conditions were tough. That wind was crazy. I'm actually out here for a second time filming this closing because I had so much wind noise in the first one, it was unusable. That wind made it really difficult to connect out there once we started to push those distances out. But let me know in the comments, what did you see for differences between the two calibers? Were you impressed with one of them versus the other one? Did one of them surprise you? Did they perform as you expected? While you're doing that, let me chat about my experience running each of those calibers side by side. Now, the first thing we did was move down to 100 yards where we saw really nice accuracy out of both rounds. That 300 Norma stacked 5 rounds into about 0.75 inches or 0.75 MOA, so pretty solid group. 300 PRC seemed to stack those 5 rounds into 1 inch or 1 MOA. Both of those I consider acceptable for shooting long ranges at the targets that I'm using. Something like this full-size IPSC or a 30-inch circle. Velocity performance on the 250 atip out of the 300 Norma, we saw an average across the chronograph of 28.75 with a extreme spread of roughly 30 and a standard deviation of roughly 10. So that extreme spread is a little bit large, standard deviation is a little bit large for pushing distances out extremely far, but ultimately we were able to connect out here. My issue today was the wind. Calculated a G7BC on the true ballistic chronograph of something like 0.443. Then we moved over to the 300 PRC where we saw average velocity a little bit higher at 28.85. Standard deviation extreme spread was about the same, of roughly 30 for an extreme spread, standard deviation of just under 10, so a little bit better there at 100 yards. And then G7BC of the 230 atip a little bit lower at 0.423. So while the 230 atip was running the same speed or just a little bit faster, that lower G7BC means it's not as efficient flying through the air. And that's exactly what we saw when we stretched out to distance. Now when we pushed out on steel, the first thing we did was shoot this full-size IPSC at 1,450 yards with each caliber. And again, I struggled to connect. I love shooting a full-size IPSC at 14 to 1,500. I think this is a great target for that distance for these big magnum calibers. But man, 40% hit ratio with each caliber, 4 for 10. The 250 atip out of the 300 Norma was doing it at about 11 mils of elevation. The 300 PRC was doing it at 11.5 to 11.6. So 1,440 yards, the difference really isn't that big. So you think about 0.6 mils, that's roughly 2 MOA. And at 1,450 yards, 2 MOA is about 29 inches. So this is 30 inches tall. So in theory, that 300 Norma would be about 30 inches flatter shooting. Pretty cool when you think about it at distance with the measurement versus just the mil number. Again, the wind was very difficult. Apologize I couldn't make more impacts. I wish I could have, but it's good to get out and challenge yourself, and that's exactly what happened to me. Then I pushed out on the 30-inch circle at 1,880 yards. And this is where we saw that gap get even larger. So now the gap is going to be pretty significant. Roughly 1.4 to 1.5 mils of advantage to the 250 atip out of the 300 Norma. So if I remember correctly, that 250 atip got to 1880 and 17.3 mils. And the 300 PRC with the 230 atip was at about 18.7. Now wind was varied between the two, but again, wind was very challenging when I was out here shooting. So I don't know that that's an accurate representation. For hit percent, they were both quite low. The 250 atip out of the 300 Norma, I connected 3 for 10 on my initial string of fire. I actually then fired 9 more rounds and connected 3 more times. So ultimately, I ended up 6 for 19 with the 300 Norma, which is a very low hit percent. Some of that could have been attributed to the large extreme spread. I saw that show up on the chronograph pushing 50 feet per second, which is quite poor. Really need to tweak my hand loads, but a lot of that missing was just the wind. There's a lot of wind that happens between here and 1,880 yards. And you know, it's hard to keep up when you're shooting by yourself. The 300 PRC at 18.7 mils, I connected 2 of 10 times on that same 30-inch circle, so very low hit percent. Again, chasing the wind, also seeing quite the large extreme spread of roughly 50 feet per second. When you see an extreme spread that big, it's really hard to connect out there because one round, if it runs on the slow side of things, is going to impact low. And then the next one, if it runs on the high side, the fast side of things, now it's going to impact high, even though you might have kept the exact same elevation hold. So the takeaway from me out here today is I have work to do on my hand loads. I thought these were dialed in pretty decently, but unfortunately what I saw is there's definitely room to improve, and I hope to do that in future content. Now, out to 1,880 yards, definitely the advantage goes to 300 Norma with regards to being flatter shooting, higher hit percent, etc. But from a shootability standpoint, what is my opinion? So I love shooting 1,000 to 2,000 yards. So when I speak these comments, it's with that caveat. I like to shoot out to about 2,000 yards, and both calibers are very capable. Both rounds are going to remain supersonic to 2,000 yards and beyond. In fact, I've shot my 300 PRC out to about 2,290 yards with decent consistency using the 230 ATIP. So they'll push way further than I shot on video. But from the shooting perspective, 300 PRC has less recoil. It's easier to control the rifle under recoil with 300 PRC. Now I have the same set of weights on both calibers. This is a very heavy rifle. It really doesn't move around that much. Recoil doesn't hurt. You can shoot both calibers all day if you want to. 300 PRC is just a little bit more tame, a little bit more manageable, and a little bit easier for me to keep on target and spot my impacts. With regards to spotting impacts out here, no problems with either round. If I hit the dust, they both make a really big splash that I can use to correct. If they hit the plate, at least out to 1,880 yards, they both move the plate quite well, and that's what allows me to see those impacts. Several times on camera, you probably saw me looking through the element theos out here. I wasn't able to see maybe the hit indicator light. There was a ton of mirage, which makes it hard to see, but you could just barely see that plate swing really with both rounds, and that's how I was able to call my own impacts on the plate. Dust, again, off the plate was easy. So I would say energy on target advantage likely a little bit to the 300 PRC with the 250 ATIP, but it wasn't like the 300 PRC with the 230 ATIP wasn't getting the job done. Cost of ownership, advantage goes to 300 PRC. 300 Norma is expensive. That 250 ATIP or the 250 grain class bullets are quite expensive, more so than the 230s. Understand I could step down and run the 230 out of the Norma, but I like shooting that high BC 250 grain bullet out of the Norma. Performs very well. So higher cost in the bullet, higher cost in the brass, more powder to the tune of about 8 to 10 grains. So if you're a hand loader, you're going to burn up more powder to shoot 300 Norma than you will 300 PRC. You got to ask yourself the question, is the trade-off of the extra cost in the Norma worth it to you for the performance advantages that you'll see downrange? I'll answer that for myself here in just a second. When you look at factory loads, again, cost advantage to the 300 PRC. Locally, you can find 300 PRC 225 ELDM Hornady loads for about $55 to $60 versus that same bullet in the 300 Norma is pushing $100, so roughly double the cost for factory Hornady ammunition. Now, which one would I choose if I could only choose one? With the caveat being, I like to shoot 1,000 to 2,000 yards, I'm going to choose 300 PRC. I love shooting 300 PRC. I've got a ton of impacts with it. 300 Norma is no slouch. It is definitely an improvement in performance. It'll stay supersonic longer, it's flatter shooting, it's harder hitting. Understand that. But for myself, looking at a max range of about 2,000 yards, 300 PRC gets the job done. Now you think about, a lot of times you hear people mention barrel burners or barrel life. To me, barrels are ultimately expendable when you get into these high velocity, high pressure, high performance calibers. Maybe one has a slight advantage over the other one, but I don't think you could say one has an advantage over the other. Really, they're both going to burn up barrels, and you have to go into Magnum life understanding that barrels are replaceable and will need to be replaced if you're going to shoot them and shoot them often. So for myself, I'm choosing 300 PRC due to lower recoil, lower cost of the reloading components, still performs very well out to 2,000 yards and beyond. And for myself, if I wanted to shoot local ammo, it is quite a bit cheaper, say half the price of the Norma. Now, if I'm going for all-out performance, I want flat shooting, I want to push 30 caliber past 2,000 yards, in that case, I likely would go to the 300 Norma. That 300 Norma is an absolute monster of a caliber. The other advantage of the 300 Norma, because of the case dimensions, you actually have a little bit more leeway in your bullet jump or your bullet length in your magazine. So I do like the fact that I can load those 250 grain bullets to mag length and have the ability to adjust my seating depth. The 300 PRC, the case dimensions on it, put the nose of the bullet right up against the magazine. You don't have a ton of variation there that you can adjust. Thankfully, the Hornady ATIP likes to jump a lot, which works well for hand loading. So from there, I hope you enjoyed the video. What are your thoughts? Which one of these calibers are you going to choose to take your next shot at a mile or further? I'd love to hear which one and why. Now, I know this is a long video. I understand there's a lot of wind noise, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to use the footage because I feel like it's important to get out and challenge yourself, and the wind was doing that for me the other day. So if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. I'd like to ask you to help me grow this channel. It's really easy. Like this video, comment down below, let me know your thoughts. Best of all, subscribe so you're in line for my next content. I have a lot of really cool things in the works, a lot of new videos coming soon, and I want you to be in line to see them drop. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join me in my next video.